Give me time to realize my crime. Let me love and steal. I have danced inside your eyes. How can I be real? Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry? Precious kisses, words that burn me. Lovers never ask you why. In my heart the fire's burning. Choose my color, find a star. Precious people always tell me that's a step too far. Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry? Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry?
Welcome to our Great Conversation special with Jackie Brambles, where today, as part of our Pride Anthems Weekender here on Greatest Hits Radio, we are delighted to be hosting an icon. I fear our opening track may well have given the game away already. Do You Really Want to Hurt Me was the debut hit for Culture Club in 1982 and became a global phenomenon. And of course, it was the launchpad for Boy George, who has been a part of the cultural lexicon ever since. When as lead singer with Culture Club, he changed perceptions, he challenged prejudices. And in doing so, I think we can all safely say he's become something of a national treasure. I can't wait for what I know will be another great conversation with George. But right as I am about to get started, that young whippersnapper Ken Bruce has just walked into the studio with a birthday cake.
He bought me a cake.
Happy birthday, George.
Oh, didn't even realise it's you. How sweet.
Hello. From Greatest Hits
How are you?
Radio.
Let me just wait a minute. Let me make a wish.
You're going to blow? You're going to blow? Can you tell us what the wish was?
No.
Cheers, Ken.
Happy birthday, Ray. Lovely
Thank
to
you
see
so much.
21, you're looking great for 21.
You look great, yeah.
I think he baked it himself. Happy birthday, George. You get to celebrate another year on the planet.
Yeah, I'm 63 today.
You feeling good?
I feel like I'm getting younger, actually.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting younger. I mean, I kind of enjoy myself more, so I feel younger, you know what I mean? I've never been grumpy, but I definitely have my periods where anxiety was more present.
Yeah.
And now as I'm sort of older, I'm just like, I can't be bothered with miserable people or being miserable. I just can't be bothered.
Well, I think that's the upside of aging, isn't it? Apart from getting to be here, it's having so much less truck for the tedious things in life.
I also think that with the internet now, it's like there's so much to kind of get stressed out about if you choose. Do you know what I mean? If you really want to get locked into it. And it's like, do I care? I mean, because in my day-to-day life, everyone I meet seems really great. I never meet anyone who's hostile or unfriendly, but online they're just everywhere. But when I go out in the world, I'm like, people are generally quite sweet.
That's interesting. How much do you immerse yourself online, or how do you discipline yourself with that kind of thing?
I sometimes get those warnings on my phone. You've been online a lot, and I'm like, I know. But yeah, I just go through periods of, I try to avoid it first thing in the morning because that can set you up in a bad mood. But yeah, I mean, I just like it. I like technology. I like what it can do, in terms of making music, communicating with people around the world. It's made things a lot freer. But then you have to deal with also people's opinions, which can be quite aggravating.
from 1983. That's I'll Tumble For You from Culture Club. Boy George is our VIP guest on this great conversation special with me for our Pride Anthems Weekender. He is here on his birthday, no less, to talk about whatever we want to talk about, really, because he's always an open book. And as Pride season has just launched this month, I'd definitely like to talk about that, George. But first, let's get into the fact that Culture Club are doing a UK tour. It kicks off in December. Tickets have just gone on sale for that. And you're doing things a bit differently than previous tours in that you're playing a lot more tracks, apart from the obvious hits, from the first couple of albums than you normally would, right?
I think from the first album, we never do anything apart from Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, which was chucked on at the last minute.
Yeah.
So the album, Do You Really, isn't really that sort of, it doesn't really sound like the rest of the record because it's very calypso-y. You know, I'd been in Bow Wow Wow previously, so I was still carrying that kind of sound, the Burundi beat. I wanted to sort of continue that. But then once you start a band, it sort of changes into something unique because everyone's influences take over and, you know, you can't be what you set out to be, but you become some hybrid, which could be quite, well, it was exciting.
And it worked.
It did, and it was sort of, you know, interesting because Do You Really Want to Hurt Me was like the third single. We had two songs from Kissing to Be Clever, which didn't really chart, but people bought them and I heard them in clubs. But it was Do You Really Want to Hurt Me that was the hit. And I was like, when they wanted to put that out, I was like, not that. So slow, the intro takes forever.
Yeah.
You know, and I was so wrong. So, yeah, I guess I don't know everything.
Well, it sounds fantastic. And on tour as well, you've got a couple of mates coming along for the ride.
Yeah, we've got Tony Hadley and Heaven 17. And, yeah, so it's going to be there'll be a lot of things you know. It's going to be one of those nights where you know what you're getting. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely.
How long have you known those guys? Do you remember the first time you met Tony Hadley and the guys from Heaven 17?
Heaven 17, obviously, I saw them really early on. So, you know, that whole period of sort of post-punk electro, that's one of my favourite periods. Cabaret Voltaire, you know, all that kind of Bauhaus stuff. And I went to see Spandau Ballet on a boat in London before they got signed. I was just a punter, like a club kid.
Right.
And I went along to that gig, you know, and I went to see them at the Scala Cinema when they did that gig there.
So an early days fan of Spandau.
Yeah, brilliant.
Check the time. It was almost time. A curious smell, an intangible crime. I'm washing my clothes, the stain still grows. Keep your eyes, the stain still shows. I feel the graze against my skin. I feel the graze against my skin. I know this feeling is alive. I know this feeling is alive. There is a guilt within my mind. There is a guilt within my mind. I know this feeling is alive. I know this feeling is alive. I don't need this pressure on. I don't need this pressure on. I don't need this pressure on.
Spandau Ballet with chant number 1, which got to number 3 in 1981. And the story goes that after Spandau recorded that track, Gary Kemp went straight to the Beetroot Club to give it to the DJ there. And Boy George was there sitting in his booth. He listened, gave it a thumbs up and said he really liked it, but would absolutely draw the line at dancing to it. Tony Hadley of Spandau will be supporting Culture Club on their upcoming UK tour in December along with Heaven 17. Tickets are on sale now for that, and we will be right back to continue our great conversation special with the legendary Boy George next. George has taken time out to join us on his birthday, no less, for our great conversation. And it's lovely, kind of fitting your birthday falls in June, George. Pride Month kicks off. For some it's a month, for some it's a season across the summer. How important has Pride been to you over the years? And what's your view of it now?
Well, it's interesting because we were talking about the internet, and there's a lot of anti-Pride rhetoric online. And it's just fascinating because, you know, for me, Pride over the years, particularly in the sort of 80s when it really was first starting, sort of 70s and 80s, it was very kind of open and people stumbled in, whether they were straight or gay, it didn't really matter. I think Pride is about a few days to celebrate your lifestyle, not necessarily your sexuality. Do you know what I mean? Because people think it's all about sex and that's what people seem to hone in on. But actually Pride is about lots of other things as well, you know, and it's 150 days. It's nothing in the grand scheme of things. When you think that we all have to live in the sort of normal world, all of us have to live in the world. But I think Pride is about laughter, dancing, taking out some of the fear that people have. You know, it's not about this whole concept of a sort of society called the LGBTQI+. Like, you know, we ring each other up when there's anything happening, and you know, gay people are as varied as any other people, you know, and I've always had this very open kind of attitude towards the world and, you know, different people. And, you know, I love straight people. They're amazing. Do you know what I mean? No one ever says that. It's like, I think it's...
I was going to say that. So.
Do you know what I mean? I like to go around saying some of my best friends are straight. My parents were straight. I know lots of straight people.
Yeah, there's no need to sort of pronounce it, really, is there? No.
Well, I think there is that thing, though, because obviously if you live in the real world, you don't have to tell people because everyone talks about their girlfriends and their partners. And when I was a kid, I remember, like, my brothers were able to bring back girlfriends, but it was kind of viewed like, oh, don't bring a guy back. You know, it was like, you know, obviously we got to that.
Yeah.
But it was being told I couldn't, made me want to. In the end, I didn't bring anyone home anyway because, you know, I just didn't, you know. But, you know, I remember thinking, why is that fair? Why do I have to? But now the world's not like that. I mean, the real world, as I say, when you go out on the street, people are great. They're not, you know, your sexuality, who cares? No one cares about it. No one comes up to you. I mean, they might say things behind your back. If you're dressed up, they might say things. I mean, I'm sure people say things about me all the time, but I don't really care because I've never really looked for approval.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with me in the first place, so why would I need to be accepted?
Guns that cross the street, you never know who you might be, who's in disguise. Ooh, as you blow a storm, there's no one there to keep you warm. It's no surprise. There's something in my eyes. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's a miracle.
It's a Miracle, which got to number 4 in 1984 for Culture Club. And before that track, George, we were talking about Pride Month, which of course is celebrated globally. Here in the UK, I believe the London March alone these days gets around 1.5 million people attending it, which is incredible. But when the first march started, which was in 1972, there were only about 2,000 people there. You, at that time, would have been all of 11 years old and probably unaware of Pride being a thing. But were you aware of who you were at that point? And how was your childhood and adolescence growing up?
I have to say that I knew from going to school and getting called names that people didn't like puffs. But at 14, I was like, that's what I am. And I kind of just accepted it. And, you know, over the years, I've always been surprised the way people go on about it, like it's such a big deal. But then I guess it depends where you live. My parents were really cool. They didn't like the idea to start with, but they got over it. You know, they weren't surprised.
Did you have any kind of, you know, as obviously you were an aspirational artist and singer, did you have any, I don't love the word role models, but that kind of thing to look up to as, you know, people who had successful lives and it wasn't a big deal?
Weirdly, my heroes, particularly my sort of queer heroes, were Bowie, Mark Bolan, who were kind of straight men.
We love to boogie. We love to boogie. Jitterbug boogie. Bolan Billy boogie. We love to boogie on Saturday night.
You know, because in the 70s, rock and roll was what informed you about liberalism and free thinking, and you had all these incredible artists. But even, people like Mick Jagger, it was like ambiguous. It was, it was otherworldly. It wasn't. I mean, these days, I think a lot of artists go out of their way to try to be normal, even though they're not. You can see that they're not good at being normal either. But there's this thing of like, oh, let's just be real. And it's like, I like living in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
I mean, the world is insane anyway, but I like living in this kind of mad, bohemian, abstract universe, which I've created.
Well, I think that's something you share with the likes of David Bowie. I mean, he created personas and universes that he lived in that were about as far away as societal norms as you could get, otherworldly, actually.
I think he kind of understood that being on the outside of things was radical. And I think that his take on it was, he never made political comments. He was very quiet about his religious views, although I think he was quite Buddhist, but he never really declared, and he wasn't, as he said himself, he said, I'm not a big finger wagger. I'm not particularly moralistic. And I guess it's quite hard to be moralistic when you're in rock and roll, Well,
and neither it should be, right? Music has always been the soundtrack of youthful rebellion.
Well, I feel like you're, particularly an artist like David Bowie, who was a massive influence on me, you're there to take people somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not to remind them of what disappoints them, but take them somewhere new, somewhere challenging, somewhere, freer.
Number 1 in 1983, Karma Chameleon. And I think that has to be the most instantly recognisable track that is intrinsically and forever linked to you and Culture Club. Even more so since Ant and Dec used it as a punchline daily when you were in the jungle a couple of years ago. But some artists who have an iconic song in the truest sense of the word, like that, can sometimes have a love-hate relationship with it, or certainly some ups and downs with it over the years. How do you feel about Karma Chameleon?
It's one of those things that I wrote instinctively, and, I think songs are about the moment. Repetition is the backbone of genius. You hear something over and over and over, it becomes part of your sort of psyche. There's just certain songs, that you hear and you go, oh yeah, I know this, it's in my bones. And Karma Chameleon is one of those songs. And I don't think I've done a show where I haven't done it, because I think there'd be like
a riot.
A riot if I didn't do that. But I've sort of had to fall in love again with that song, because, it's sort of, it did get very annoying at one point, and then you think, well, think of what it's done for me.
Yeah.
It's done so many great things for me. So be nicer to it. Yeah. So I'm back in love with it as a song now.
We mentioned Ant and Dec there, who spent a lot of time dancing to Karma Chameleon when you appeared on I'm a Celebrity a couple of years ago. What was fascinating about that for me, watching you on that show, was seeing what an anchor your Buddhist practices, your meditation, your philosophies were for you navigating daily life in there. Not that there was anything normal about being in the jungle, obviously, but when was that great awakening for you? What was the pivotal moment that pushed you to seek out a different way to be and to behave in the world?
I think for me personally, it's been something over since the pandemic, there's been massive changes in my experience of myself and the world. That was the beginning of me going, oh, I've got time now to think about this. What am I going to do with this moment? And that was when I really started to look at sort of, my Buddhism, certain practices that I used to do more, that I stopped doing.
Yeah.
I went back to a lot of that because there was time to do it. And then I realized actually it's really helpful and massively powerful. And one of the things that I used to do sporadically was this thing called EFT, which is the tapping, emotional freedom tapping.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to say it works, because our brains are pretty dumb. And if we believe the stuff we're saying about ourselves in our heads, then you have to find a way of counteracting that and literally, telling yourself it's going to be an amazing day. This is going to go well. Instead of expecting things to be a disaster, say, I have a choice in this, which is quite fascinating because once you realise you can change the way you think about something, even petty things, it's massively helpful, I think.
Put your head on my shoulder, sink me in a river of tears. This could be the best place yet, but you must overcome your fears. Ooh, in time, it could have been so much more. The time is precious, I know. In time, it could have been so much more. The time is nothing to show, because time won't give me time, and time makes lovers feel like they got something real.
Number 3 in 1982, Time, Clock of the Heart, which was the follow-up single to Do You Really Want to Hurt Me from Culture Club's debut album, Kissing to Be Clever, which you can see Culture Club performing live on their UK tour in December. And we will be back to continue our great conversation with the living and lovely legend that is Boy George next on Greatest Hits Radio. And as we talked about earlier, Culture Club's UK tour kicks off in December with Tony Hadley and Heaven 17 supporting. It's just so wonderful that you've had this coming together of the band, well, of 3/4 of the band at this stage of the game. I'm sure there were times back in the day when the pressure was being piled on, as it always inevitably is when a band is having a huge moment. There are outside influences that intrude on the band dynamic, which can create internal strife. There are the darker pitfalls of rock and roll. And I bet you couldn't have imagined that 40 odd years on from when it all started, you'd be together again at this point, doing big tours still.
Culture Club, was a bit of a car crash.
In what way?
Well, just, there was romances and explosions, and there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes that became more important than the band in a way, more important than the music. I mean, we were recording yesterday and
right.
We're doing this documentary at the moment about the band, and it's interesting because, it's interesting to hear people's grievances like 30 years on, what upset them back in the day. And you go, well, I didn't know that you were upset about that and I wasn't doing, you know what I mean? You suddenly grow up and
I was going to say, were there any big surprises in these recent discussions? Were you like, what?
I think the big surprise, in a way, was how strongly some things affected Roy or Mikey. And, obviously I had my relationship with John, but then John would jump sides and be with Mikey and Roy. So it was the three of them against me sometimes. Then it was me and him against everyone. There were a lot of sort of changes of allegiance that happened a lot. So people were confused. And I think through doing this documentary, Roy's found out things about me and he's like, wow, I can't believe you had to deal with that. But, I don't live in the past. So I remember it, but it doesn't have any kind of weight on me. I'm like, yeah, it happened, but
right.
Now's always better.
I think especially because of, your sort of philosophical view of the world, you're able to ascribe a positivity to even the worst of situations and everything, you learn, don't you? Nobody learns that much when they're on top of the world. It's when you're kind of in the pits of despair that you're sort of sharpening your intellect and your emotional IQ.
Yeah, and I think you've got to watch that, things don't make you negative, because it's very easy to go down the sort of negative route. But I've always been a sort of insane optimist. I always think think big if you're going to think anyway. Just be, try and think something positive rather than just thinking that, the world is a doom place, because it can feel like that sometimes.
Victims we know so well, they shine in your eyes when they kiss and tell. Strange faces we never see, but you're always there, like a ghost in my dream. And I keep on telling you, please don't do the things you do. When you do those things for my puppet strings, and the strangers fall for you.
Victims from Culture Club. That got to number 3 in 1983, which was bang in the middle of that period from 82 to 84, where Culture Club were having hits, every 3 or 4 months. But with that huge external fame and success, as you said a few minutes ago, you were internally as a band going through a really torrid time. I know you've spoken in the past about Live Aid, and that although Culture Club were originally slated to perform, it didn't happen because you just weren't in a fit state to do it. So ultimately, it was probably for the best that you didn't. But your vocal was a really big part of the initial Band-Aid record. And it's going to be, incredibly, 40 years ago this year that Bob Geldof pulled together the brightest and the best to help raise funds for those suffering in the Ethiopian famine. So what are your memories of that day?
I made it to the actual recording, so I was there on the day, and I arrived about 7 or 8 in the evening, and it was kind of amazing. Actually, I watched a documentary about the American one recently.
Yeah, me too.
And it seemed that was much more fraught with ego.
Yeah.
The one in London was just, it was so weird to have all those people in that space and no one kicking off, because it was like, there wasn't room for any ego. It was so funny to be in a space. I was looking around going, everyone is here and everyone's kind of chilled. And it's like, you see the American one and people are kicking off. It's like limos, and it was very different in London. I really enjoyed watching the American one. I thought, wow, we didn't have any of that. But the London one was like, Status Quo were there, this one was there, but not everyone. It was hilarious.
And what about the actual mechanics of how the track was put together, particularly your own vocals? What are your memories of that?
Yeah, I remember actually when I arrived at the studio, I'd just got off a plane. I barely knew the song. I was played it once or twice, forced into the vocal booth. It was like, no second goes, one go, okay, we're done. It was very rushed. And, took you out of your comfort zone in terms of recording, but yeah, they captured something. It was a moment, and it was about that moment. It wasn't about perfect. It was about, what the charity was trying to achieve.
And in our world of plenty, we can spread a smile of joy. Throw your arms around the world at Christmas time.
That's Do They Know It's Christmas by Band-Aid, featuring our great conversation special guest Boy George, of course. It's made in excess of £200 million for the Band-Aid Trust, who continue their work 40 years on. Not bad for a day's work in the studio. Let's talk about Culture Club's own discography. You spoke earlier about Do You Really Want to Hurt Me being a kind of anomaly that was a last-minute addition to the Kissing to Be Clever album, and Cyber Chameleon, a song that has annoyed and charmed you by turns over the years, but you've always had this awareness that it is an iconic song that's given you so much over the piece. But if you had to pick a favourite right now, what would that be?
I think the Church of the Poison Mind is, we've redone it recently. We've actually done this weird thing, which shouldn't work, but does. We've gone back to 3 or 4 of those songs and we've kind of reggae-fied them. And actually, Church of the Poison Mind is really interesting. It's like, oh my God, it's still the same song, but it's got more of a sort of bluesy, scarry feel to it. But we mix that with I'm Your Man from Wham.
Baby, I'm your man. Don't you know that, baby, I'm your man.
I remember at the time when that came out, it reminded me of Church because,
Yeah.
it was the Motown sound. So we mixed those 2 songs together, and that is like literally one of the best moments in the show because just people go nuts for that,
A number 2 hit for Culture Club in 1983. That's Church of the Poison Mind, which has been revamped with a bit of a Wham vibe for the live UK tour coming up in December.
And in fact, you say you're living in Scotland. Is that where you are? 'Cause
Yeah.
do you know Helen Terry? She's up there somewhere.
Oh, is she?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yes. She's the powerhouse backing vocal on Church of the Poison Mind.
If you see her, ask her if she wants to do the gigs with us.
I'll do that if I bump into her.
If you ask her, she might say yes.
All right, I'm on it, George. No worries.
Thanks, love.
Right, so we're nearly at the end of our great conversation hour, George. We just need you to pick a final track for us. Perhaps one that has stayed with you over the years, whether it's because you have a personal connection to it or just great respect for it as a songwriter or a singer, or maybe a track that you wish you'd gotten to record. So what are you going to go for?
Well, yeah, I am quite random. Let me think. I'm trying to think of something that isn't random. What about This Charming Man by the Smiths?
Oh, yeah. Why that one?
Because I remember when it came out, just thinking the lyrics were so brilliant. You know, I would go out tonight, but I haven't got a stitch to wear. There was some kind of it was just, yeah, I just thought it was such a great lyric. And it was the first time that I started to really listen to the way Morrissey wrote, and his view on the world was so interesting because I'm also a Gemini, so I look at life from under the bed. And that song is just like, you know, there's so many times lyrics, you go, I just think the lyrics are brilliant. I mean, to me, you know, I know he's a controversial character, but, you know, also the Smiths, the guitar sound, the production, everything about that record. It was kind of, especially where we were as a band, because we were, you know, makeup and glamour, and Morrissey turns up with a hearing aid and a bunch of gladiolas, and it's like a geography teacher. And it was the opposite. It was the sort of absolute polar opposite of what we were about. And I think it was just, yeah, I found it really exciting and refreshing.
Punctured bicycle on a hillside desolate. Will nature make a man of me, yeah? When in this charming car.
From 1983, The Smiths and This Charming Man, our final track of our great conversation hour, as chosen by our very special guest, Boy George, who's taken time out on his birthday to spend an hour with us on Greatest Hits Radio. So what are you going to get up to for the rest of your big day?
I am working because I love working. People always go, do you want to work on your birthday? I'm like, yep, absolutely. Birthday, schmirthday. It's great to be, you know, every day's my birthday.
What a great attitude you've got. All the best. Happy birthday, my lovely. What a pleasure.
Thanks, babe.
Bye.
Bye.
Boy George, always an uplifting delight to spend time with him. And don't forget that if you want to see Culture Club along with supporting acts Tony Hadley and Heaven 17, the tour kicks off in December in Dublin on the 3rd, then on to Liverpool, Leeds, Newcastle, Cardiff, Nottingham, Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, and finishing up in London at the O2 on the 15th of December.